The Machiavellians by James Burnham, Part 6. Vilfredo Pareto, The Nature of Social Action. Vilfredo Pareto was an Italian academic with an incredibly broad intellectual background. His knowledge covered engineering, sociology, philosophy, economics, and political theory. From this impressive range of knowledge, Pareto developed some of the most comprehensive and influential frameworks for understanding political and social dynamics. His work represented a significant contribution to the Machiavellian tradition, as well as the scholarly fields of economics and political science. Pareto was born in Paris on July 15, 1848, to a French mother and an Italian father. It is perhaps fitting that he became one of the most famous political scientists in history because politics influenced Pareto's life from day one. His birthplace and even his name were determined by political issues. Pareto was born in France because his father, a Genoese marquis, was exiled from Italy for his Republican views. The year of Pareto's birth, 1848, also known as the Year of Revolutions, witnessed a series of political uprisings in Europe that affected over 50 countries. It remains the most widespread revolutionary wave in European history. Enthusiastic about the 1848 revolutions in the German states, Vilfredo's parents gave their son a German name, Wilfried Fritz, which became Vilfredo Pareto upon his family's return to Italy in 1858. When his family moved back to Italy, Pareto witnessed the final stages of Italian unification, culminating in 1871. This formative experience of nation-building later influenced his perspectives on social change and political systems. Pareto received a rigorous education in mathematics and engineering at the Polytechnic University in Turin, where he graduated in 1870. He spent his early career as a civil engineer and later as a managing director of an iron and steel company, giving him practical experience in industry that informed his later economic theories. In many ways, Pareto's career paralleled that of Sorel's. Both began their careers in engineering and did not publish their works on political theory until later in life. Moreover, their engineering backgrounds feature prominently in their systematic and dispassionate view of politics. Pareto did not begin his scholarly work on economics and politics until the 1880s, when he was in his mid-40s. As an academic, he expressed frustration with what he perceived as corruption and inefficiency of the post-unification Italian government. His disillusionment with parliamentary democracy grew over time, eventually leading to more elitist positions. Pareto's academic career began when he was appointed as a professor of political economy at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland in 1893. There, he developed his most influential economic theories, including the concept of Pareto efficiency and the famous Pareto principle. The Pareto principle derived from his observation that 80% of the wealth in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. This 80-20 rule has since been applied to many other areas of society. One of the first to do so was Joseph Duran, a Romanian-American engineer and a management consultant who learned of Pareto's 80-20 rule in the 1940s. Duran applied the Pareto principle to business, management, and manufacturing. He also formulated the maxim that 80% of the effects result from 20% of the causes. Examples of the Pareto principle appear across many different domains. In business, 80% of a company's revenue often comes from 20% of its customers. In software development, 80% of the bugs in a computer program are often found in 20% of the code. In healthcare, 80% of medical resources are typically used by 20% of the patients. Though not evidenced in all aspects of society, the Pareto principle appears in many areas of daily life. Though famous for the 80-20 rule, it was not the primary focus of Pareto's scholarly work. As Italy struggled with political instability in the decades following unification, Pareto's work increasingly focused on social theory and elite circulation. His masterwork, Tratto di Sociologia Generale, published in 1916, and published in English as The Mind in Society in 1935, introduced his theory of the circulation of the elites. Perhaps most important, this work also analyzed how power transfers between different types of elites. Like the other Machiavellians, Pareto argued that societies are always managed by a ruling class. But Pareto took this principle a few steps further, observing that social change occurs primarily through the replacement of one elite group with another, rather than through genuine democratic processes. Pareto's later years coincided with the rise of fascism in Italy. He died in 1923, just months after Mussolini's march on Rome. Fascist intellectuals appropriated many of Pareto's ideas. However, scholars debate the extent to which Pareto himself endorsed fascism, as his relationship with Mussolini's movement was ambivalent and complex. Some historians argue that Pareto wrote letters critical of fascism. Others argue that Pareto welcomed fascism as a transition to a more effective and efficient government. Indeed, Pareto expressed disillusionment with parliamentary democracy, which he believed contributed to Italy's instability. Pareto initially embraced aspects of fascism, but remained extremely skeptical of authoritarianism and collectivism. Though an elitist, Pareto upheld many liberal values. Indeed, this is a common theme in the Italian elitist school. Their elitism did not diminish their preference for civil liberties. Like other members of the Italian elitist school, Pareto was an outspoken advocate for individual liberties like free speech. He also championed free markets. Pareto did not live long enough to witness Mussolini's destruction of these liberal values. Nevertheless, Pareto's ideas deeply influenced fascist thought. Mussolini even attended Pareto's lectures at the University of Lausanne in 1904. But Pareto's legacy was by no means limited to his incidental contributions to fascism. Pareto's interdisciplinary approach, combining mathematics, economics, sociology, and political theory, created a rich intellectual legacy that continues to influence multiple academic disciplines. His work on income distribution, market equilibrium, and elite theory reflected both his engineering background and his lived experience through the tumult and aftermath of Italian unification. This summary examines Pareto's social theory, focusing on his distinctions between logical and non-logical conduct, his concepts of residues and derivations as constant and variable social factors, his understanding of social utility, and his theory of the circulation of the elites. Together, these elements provide a powerful analytical framework for understanding social and political behavior. Chapter 1. Logical and Non-Logical Conduct. The foundation of Pareto's social analysis lay in his distinction between what he called logical and non-logical conduct. According to Pareto, logical conduct must fulfill three specific requirements. 1. It is motivated by a consciously held purpose or goal. 2. That goal is possible. And 3. Appropriate steps are taken to reach that goal. If an action fails to fulfill any one of these conditions, Pareto deemed it non-logical. Burnham helpfully rephrased this dichotomy in terms of his concept of formal and real meaning. Quote, where there is a disparity between the formal goal and the real goal of an action, then the action is non-logical. In logical action, the formal goal and the real goal are identical. End quote. Put simply, Pareto deemed an individual's actions logical if their behavior conformed to their stated intentions and goals. Pareto observed non-logical conduct to be far more prevalent than logical conduct. More important, he asserted that non-logical conduct predominates in society and politics. As Burnham said, the contest of power is fought, quote, above all in the arena of the non-logical, end quote. Indeed, politics makes much more sense when we realize that the vast majority of political conduct is completely illogical. Burnham noted that the stated goals of public documents, declarations, constitutions, charters, and similar pronouncements are often inconsistent with their motivations and implementation. Quote, declarations call often for freedom, but freedom by itself is a term with no content whatsoever. There is no freedom in general, only freedom from certain things or for certain things, which always involves restrictions in other specific respects. Again, this observation related to Burnham's concept of formal versus real meaning. Political speech is not meaningful at face value. The actions of a state are often at odds with its stated goals and ideology. As Burnham pointed out, quote, Soviet Russia did not at all drop its belief in the Marxist ideal of a classless society, while class differentiation steadily developed after the revolution, end quote. Chapter 2. Residues and Derivations. After establishing Pareto's conception of logical and non-logical conduct, Burnham turned to what Pareto identified as the constant and variable factors in society, residues and derivations. Pareto defined residues as constant or slowly changing social factors. Although residue might seem like a strange term for enduring social forces, it makes sense when conceived of as societal elements that remain when variable factors are stripped away. Upon removing the variable factors, only the constant factors remain, hence residues. Put another way, residues, or the constant social factors, exist independently of variable factors. Conversely, variable factors exist dependently upon constant factors. One could say that the former derive from the latter. Thus, Pareto called variable social factors derivations. As Burnham clarified, quote, it is important to keep them theoretically distinct and to insist that a residue is a social and not a psychological term. Pareto's theories, properly understood, do not depend upon any special psychological doctrine. Even if psychology says that men do not have any permanent instincts, it may still be true that there are certain permanent or at least relatively constant types of social activity, end quote. Pareto identified 6 classes of residues, the first of which he called the instinct for combinations. The instinct for combinations relates to the human impulse to make sense of the world. Pareto observed a human tendency to combine or manipulate various elements from experience to provide an explanatory framework for understanding reality. Moreover, this instinct for combination identified man's tendency to rationalize their behaviors, even when those behaviors are irrational. As Burnham elaborated, quote, "This is the tendency which leads human beings to combine or manipulate various elements taken arbitrarily from experience. Many magical practices are a result of this operation. The manipulations to control weather or disease, to bring good luck, the supposed efficacy assigned to certain numbers." End quote. In other words, the instinct for combinations represents the human impulse to create worldviews. Humans do not use reductive reasoning for all, let alone most, problems of life. Instead, we rely on a priori frameworks, proceeding from theories and ideologies rather than direct observation and experience. For Burnham, this instinct for combinations is Pareto's most important class of residues, and the one that accounts chiefly for the derivations, because it identified, quote, "man's need to make his own behavior seem rational," end quote. As I believe Oliver Wendell Holmes said, all ratioization is rationalization. Or put equally perceptively by Robert Heinlein, quote, "Man is not a rational animal, he is a rationalizing animal," end quote. In addition to deceiving ourselves, Pareto's instinct for combinations also involved the ability to deceive others. Pareto's instinct for combinations related closely to Machiavelli's concept of the fox, that a ruler must have a cunning instinct for deception. A ruler with the qualities of the fox has the ability to combine clever arguments that captivate, persuade, and control the minds of the masses. The clever qualities of the fox also relate to the capacity for innovation. As discussed later in Burnham's summary of Pareto's concept of the circulation of the elites, Pareto's instinct for combinations was exemplified in ancient Athens, a city which fostered philosophy, art, and trade, while managing a formidable empire in the eastern Mediterranean. Class 2 residues, group persistences. Upon committing to worldviews or combinations, people tend to defend them. Moreover, these worldviews are strongly influenced by social pressure. This tendency forms Pareto's second class of social constants, group persistences. It is quite understandable that we are reluctant to change our worldviews, since they form the basis of our understanding of reality. Challenges to people's worldviews threaten to disrupt their ability to make sense of the world, which explains why people often become emotional when their deeply held beliefs come under attack. Most important, individuals share worldviews in common with a group. Thus, challenging an individual's worldview does not just threaten their personal ego, it threatens to place them at odds with the group. Since we are social animals and react negatively to being ostracized, there is an extreme social pressure to conform to the dominant ideological orthodoxy. Burnham noted that Pareto's concept of group persistences is, quote, "sometimes referred to as social inertia, and is usually accompanied by a willingness to use force in order to maintain the solidity and persistence of the entities in question," end quote. In contrast to Class 1 residues relating to the instinct for combinations, exemplified by ancient Athens, Class 2 residues of group persistences characterized ancient Sparta. The Spartans maintained a rigid hierarchy and protected their social order by force. Thus, they organized their entire society around their formidable army. In Machiavelli's terms, Class 1 residues of combinations in Athens represented the qualities of the fox. Class 2 residues of group persistences in Sparta represented the qualities of the lion. Class 3 residues, the need of expressing sentiments by external acts. Pareto's third class of residues identified the human impulse to act upon their sentiments. As Burnham explained, quote, "most human beings constantly feel the need to do something, whether or not the something done can accomplish any desired purpose. Ignorance of medical science in no way stops the family from bustling about when someone is ill," end quote. In short, Pareto observed a human instinct to fix problems, even when they do not have the appropriate knowledge or expertise to provide solutions. Class 4 residues, residues connected with sociality. Pareto's fourth class of residues, and closely related to the second, described social factors relating to the individual's relationship with society, most notably the pressure to conform to the group and to one's place in the hierarchy of that group. Indeed, this class of residues closely resembles the second class of residues of group persistences. But more than just social inertia, Pareto's residues connected with sociality identify the human instinct to conform to the group regardless of the ideology at hand. Indeed, humans have a frightening tendency to adjust their behaviors, even their thoughts, to the group. More important, for Burnham, this predilection toward conformity precedes ideological abstractions like patriotism and religion. Quote, "We do not sacrifice our life for our country because we believe in some complex philosophical theory, of which many are available, about the nature of social life and the state. A tendency to self-sacrifice is prior to these theories." End quote. Again, going beyond Class 2 residues and social inertia, Pareto's Class 4 residues, connected with sociality, identify the human instinct to sacrifice themselves on behalf of the group. Class 5 residues, integrity of the individual and his appurtenances. Pareto's fifth class of residues identified the instinct to preserve one's integrity and interests. In Burnham's words, quote, "These are the feelings that lead men to guard their personal integrity, to maintain themselves and the conditions of their existence," end quote. Basically, this is the impulse to preserve the status quo and one's interest within that status quo and the social hierarchy. In slave societies, the majority of people reject emancipation, even when, as was the case of the Confederacy in the Civil War, most Southerners were not slave owners. Likewise, in capitalist societies, attacks on removing private property rights are met with indignation, even when, as Pareto observed, most of the wealth in society is owned by only a fraction of the population. No matter the socioeconomic structure, people tend to preserve the system rather than overturn it. In other words, humans prefer stability and maintenance of the status quo over revolution and change. Class 6 residues, the sex residue. Despite its rather awkward name, the sex residue is not merely concerned with biological sex. More precisely, the sex residue concerns moral customs and religious doctrines related to marriage and sexuality, and how these social rules influence the broader culture and society. Thus, Burnham asserted, quote, "In his treatment of the sex residue and its sublimations, Pareto is not unlike Freud, though he was apparently not directly acquainted with Freud's writings," end quote. Having defined Pareto's 6 social constants, Burnham delineated Pareto's 4 types of derivations. Again, Pareto conceived derivations as the variable factors in society that depend on the constant factors, or residues. As Burnham elaborated, derivations include, quote, "all or nearly all doctrines and beliefs and theories that figure in social struggles, principles of democracy and law and authority, moral and theological systems, justifications of this or that form of society, bills of rights, and programs and charters," end quote. Essentially, Pareto's classes of derivations described 4 methods by which people deduce theories and doctrines from social constants. Class 1 derivations, assertion. As Burnham explained, Pareto's first class of derivations represent, quote, "mere dogmatic assertion," end quote. These frequently take the form of maxims such as honesty is the best policy, it is better to receive a wrong than inflict one, the golden rule, and so on. Such aphorisms carry immense social power. They are repeated and acted upon so often in society that they become common proverbs, even cliches. Partly for this reason, assertions are often the most simple, direct, and effective form of derivations. Paradoxically, these assertions are repeated so frequently that they are often empty of meaning, yet they still contain the power to persuade the masses to social action. Harnessing the power of dogmatic assertions represents a key component of effective propaganda. Providing a striking example of this derivation, Burnham cited one of the most effective works of propaganda in history, Hitler's Mein Kampf. Quote, "Propaganda must limit itself to saying very little, and this little it must keep forever repeating," end quote. Class 2 derivations, authority. Pareto's second class of derivations describes the human instinct to accept appeals to authority. Such appeals may derive from expertise, tradition, custom, and so forth. Burnham pointed out that appeals to authority are logical fallacies, but that does not diminish their power to persuade the masses. As he said, quote, "There is seldom the slightest scientific justification for accepting the relevance of the authority's opinion, which besides is wholly unreal. But this does not weaken the effectiveness of the derivation. God's will, the Bible, what our forefathers said, remain cogent arguments from a non-logical standpoint," end quote. Class 3 derivations, accords with sentiment or principles. Closely related to appeals to authority, Pareto's third class of derivations relate to appeals to common sensibilities and social values. Moreover, this derivation paralleled Sorel's concept of the function of myth. Politicians must appeal to the sentiments and principles of the people. These sentiments and principles are largely based on myths. As Burnham clarified, quote, "Men convert sentiments into abstractions, persistent realities, and everlasting principles. The power of these entities is derived from the feelings they express, not from their supposed logical or scientific rigor," end quote. Class 4 derivations, verbal proofs. Pareto's fourth class of derivations included all rhetoric used to persuade. Again, such rhetoric need not be coherent or logical. As Burnham put it, quote, "These are familiar derivations that depend upon verbal confusions and fallacies, ambiguous terms, the intrusion of emotive expressions in the place of statement of fact, metaphors and allegories taken for proofs, all of which have been recently so much discussed by the many writers on semantics." End quote. Although perhaps the most simple of the derivations, it may be the most important. The ability to use words to persuade masses to do what you want is perhaps one of the most important skills in human history. Chapter 3. Social Utility. Having described Pareto's constant and variable social forces, Burnham focused his attention on the social utility of these forces. By social utility, Pareto meant those factors which promote the overall welfare of society. Unfortunately, those factors that advance the condition of the community are often contrary to the interests of the individual. For Pareto, the factors that give a nation its strength, stability, and vitality are not usually the same factors that contribute to the happiness and satisfaction of its citizens. Quite the contrary, Burnham elaborated. Quote, "In general, measures which provide more adequately for the strength of the community in the future, especially in a future some years or generations distant, diminish the satisfactions of the existing generation." End quote. Similarly to individuals, nations constantly face the decision between short-term benefit and long-term gratification. But unlike individuals, who can make choices on their own accord, nations must attend to the desires of many individuals, thus making national decisions much more difficult than individual ones. One way, and perhaps the only way, to address this problem is to convince individuals that their interests are inextricably linked to the interests of the nation. Again, this relates to Sorel's function of myth. In part, the social utility of a myth derives from its ability to unite the interests of the individual and the nation. In part, the social utility of a myth derives from its ability to fuse the interests of the individual to the nation. As Burnham elaborated, quote, "Almost always is it socially useful to have people believe that their own individual happiness is bound up with the acceptance of the community standards, or, as moral philosophers put it, that there is a direct correspondence between the welfare of the individual and the welfare of society." End quote. Observing the important function of myth for the stability and operations of society, Pareto noted that a myth need not be true to be effective. As long as a myth serves to unite the interests of the individual to the nation, it serves one of its primary purposes. The truth or falsity of a myth is irrelevant to its social utility. Thus, Pareto argued, truth is not always advantageous, and falsehood, even nonsense, not always harmful. As Burnham reiterated, quote, "False beliefs do sometimes produce evil social results, but they often also benefit the community. The myths are, in the first place, a necessary ingredient of social life." End quote. Indeed, Pareto's concept of the social utility of beliefs directly paralleled Sorel's idea of the function of myth. As Sorel observed, people do not generally organize themselves around rational arguments. They are motivated, rather, by irrational myths. A society cannot organize itself exclusively around logical scientific truths because, as Sorel and Pareto pointed out, most political conduct is non-logical. Therefore, we have to accept the function of myth. Even if it is ridiculous, a myth of great social utility is an indispensable feature of society. For Pareto, if a myth serves to promote the general well-being of the community, its truth or falsity matters very little in the practical sense. As Burnham said, quote, "The doctrine of the divine right of kings is scientifically ridiculous. From this it does not follow that it would always be better if men understood that it was ridiculous, nor that a belief in it always hurts society. The democratic ideology is equally ridiculous from the point of view of scientific truth. Belief in it may, nevertheless, in one historical context, greatly aid, in another gravely injure the welfare of society." End quote. Chapter 4. The Circulation of the Elites. Pareto observed that the membership of the elite class is never static. Some degree of upward mobility exists in all societies, even in caste systems. Of course, such circulation increases when caste systems are removed, but even then, Pareto found that there are always obstacles, or ties as he called them, that prevent the free circulation of elites. Too many such obstacles pose a grave danger to society. As Burnham warned, quote, "If the elite becomes closed, or almost so, degeneration is bound to set in." The circulation of the elites is not characterized merely by movement up or down the socioeconomic scale. As Burnham elaborated, quote, "What influences social development is not the mere shift of individuals, but change in the types of individual," end quote. The most important types of individuals, according to Pareto, are those embodying his first two classes of residues, combinations and group persistences. In Machiavelli's terms, individuals marked primarily by combinations are the foxes. These are people highly skilled in combining observations into clever rhetorical explanations that persuade or, most important, deceive the public to action. Those marked by group persistences are the lions. These individuals seek to preserve current combinations, not invent new ones, and rely primarily on force rather than intelligence to achieve their ends. To illustrate this distinction, Pareto pointed to the differences between ancient Athens and Sparta. Athens represented Pareto's first class of residues, combinations. The Athenians welcomed new ideas in almost every field of inquiry, from economics and politics to art and culture. In keeping with Machiavelli's fox, the Athenian elite cleverly combined social factors to their benefit. For example, after defeating Persia at Salamis, Athens took advantage of the fleet she built for the war and turned it to her advantage by establishing a commercial shipping empire in the eastern Mediterranean. Sparta, by extreme contrast, embodied Pareto's second class of residues, group persistences. Innovation was considered a crime. Spartans regulated everything in society according to a custom, religion, and tradition. Like Machiavelli's lion, Sparta protected her society by cunning use of force. The abilities of the Spartan army are legendary, quite literally, as immortalized by the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. But since they focused so much on their brawn, the Spartans did not have much for brains. Consequently, noted Burnham, Sparta, quote, produced no philosophy, no liquid wealth, and little art, end quote. Despite her formidable army, Sparta never endeavored to establish an empire. Her primary concern was group persistence, the preservation of the community. As Burnham concluded, quote, "The individual counted for nothing, the group for all. Adventure was always to be distrusted." From these roots, Sparta derived a tremendous power of endurance when faced with adversity, but she always stopped short of doing anything spectacular, end quote. Paradoxically, this preference for preservation sowed the seeds of Sparta's demise. Its obsession with its military, combined with its lack of interests in innovations or combinations, caused Spartan society to become increasingly ossified and unable to adapt to change. Its strategy of preservation focused almost entirely upon its army. Consequently, Sparta became a militarist society, taking on a rigidity one would expect of a military chain of command. Satisfied with its military strategy of preservation, Sparta saw no reason to change. Seeing no need to change the organization of her rigid militarist society, Sparta saw no need for the elites to change either. This made for a stable society and a legendary army, but it rendered Spartan society unable to adjust to changing times. By contrast, Athenian society embraced innovation and combinations and produced a society famous for its art and philosophy, while also maintaining for some time the strongest empire in the Mediterranean. Pareto's social theory, as interpreted by James Burnham, offers a comprehensive framework for understanding social dynamics. By distinguishing logical and non-logical conduct, identifying the constant residues and variable derivations that shape society, analyzing the concept of social utility, and exploring the circulation of the elites, Pareto provides powerful tools for social and political analysis. Central to Pareto's approach is the recognition that non-logical conduct predominates in the social and political sphere, with myths playing a crucial role in maintaining social cohesion despite their potential scientific inaccuracy. Additionally, the circulation of elites, particularly the balance between foxes, or clever individuals with a penchant for innovative combinations, and lions, or militant individuals with a preference for group persistences, proves essential for social vitality and adaptation. Through Pareto's Machiavellian perspective, we gain insights into why societies function as they do, why political rhetoric often diverges from political reality, and why societies must balance innovation with tradition, individual interests with collective welfare, and change with stability. Pareto's theories continue to offer valuable perspectives on social and political phenomena, reminding us that beneath the surface of ideological declarations and political pronouncements lie deeper, more constant social forces that shape human behavior and societal development. This concludes my summary of Part 6 of the Machiavellians. If you'd like citations with page numbers for each of the quotes in this video, please subscribe to my Substack at benuturi.substack.com. Thank you.